Hi all, here to explain the final essay. Two things to note right off the bat. So this is due on the 25th. That is not this coming Monday, but next Monday. Another thing to note, that it's a 4-paragraph essay. So while we do have other things going on, for example, next week we have the reading exam, if you're plugging away at this assignment and this outline, then you should be in fairly good shape. So just right off the bat, those two things. So what I'll do in this next part of the video is I'll talk about the details of this assignment, how it should be broken down, and then I'll show you the outline and how it can help you build your paper. So first, the question. Our essay, as I've been talking about, is going to discuss the last 3 authors that we have read as a part of our coming of age unit. So, Jamaica Kincaid's Girl, Handful of Dates, Taib Salih, and the Cisneros stories. Most particularly, I would say the story 11. So your assignment is first to choose 2 of these authors, and your essay is going to answer this question. How do the authors use figurative language in each story to communicate something about how the narrator has either come of age or changed in some significant way? Alright. So what that question does is it puts together 2 of the major threads, 2 of the major themes we've been discussing. We've been talking about, obviously, coming of age. So how do these stories talk about the process of growing up, the process of realizing something about how the world works, realizing something about who they are as characters, and, building and thinking about who they want to become. And there are elements of that in each of these stories from each of these authors that we've read. And so the other part of that is to talk about how does the figurative language in the story give us more detail about this character's process of coming of age, or of growing, or of changing over the course of the story. So essentially what the question is asking is, how do these authors use figurative language to talk about coming of age? So that's metaphors, similes, symbolism, just deeper meaning in figurative language in general. Okay, because figurative language can tell us a lot of things that the direct text does not. So, onward. As I said, 4 paragraphs. It'll be about 3 pages double-spaced. For some of you, it'll be more. So, here is what you need in the essay itself. Your intro should define what you mean by coming of age. And we did have class discussions about this, and I did send out documents based on the notes for those discussions. So as you're coming up with a definition for what coming of age is, you have actually a lot of notes that have been emailed to you and posted in Blackboard that should help you with that. The next thing that you have to do is to introduce both of these stories that you're going to be discussing in this paper, and then finally you're going to end with a thesis. I've given you a sample thesis here, and if you remember what the midterm was like, this thesis is somewhat similar. It's not like a Cat W thesis where I'm asking you to come up with a original critical thesis based on an essay prompt to talk about and defend your argument. This is more like you could use this thesis, and I encourage you to use this thesis or some version of this thesis this thesis is saying both of these authors use figurative language to communicate the themes of growth and coming of age. Your task in this essay is to explain how that's happening. And so that's why I say you can use this thesis, because, again, the main aim of this text is to look at the stories that we've read and how these authors are using figurative language to talk about change, growth, coming of age. Your main part of this essay are going to be the two body paragraphs, where you're analyzing how a character changed or came of age and how figurative language shows that. And when you're talking about coming of age in these paragraphs, remember your own definition of coming of age in the introduction, because it should be consistent with your definition of coming of age. And finally, your conclusion is where I'm asking you about your opinion, and I'm asking you what you got out of one of these stories. So your conclusion is discussing which story you found most compelling and why. So this shouldn't be just some toss-away opinion. I want you to be able to be specific about what is it about the story that drew you in. What did you relate to? What did you like? And then what lessons can we come away with from this story? What messages did you find and hear? And that's how this is going to be broken down. The rest of this document, which again you should be able to find in Blackboard, is an outline. So you'll notice that each section is based on one paragraph. So if you are diligent and thorough in filling in this outline, you'll have a much easier time writing your paper. And if you look at the assignment up here and you look at the breakdown over here, everything in this outline corresponds to the assignment and the breakdown. So this would start, as I said, with your definition of coming of age. And then here you're introducing the characters, not the characters, rather the stories, the two stories that you are using. You're also, like we did in the midterm, going to include very brief summaries for each of these stories that you're using. And then after that comes your thesis. Like I said, you can use literally the thesis that I gave you or some version of it. Next, we have the structure for the body paragraphs. Notice how the topic sentence helps to answer the question. In this story by this author, we can see that the narrator changes or comes of age because he or she experiences, notices, or realizes what. So something about the experience of the story should show us that the character has undergone a significant change. Even if you can't argue that they fully came of age, notice that that's not a requirement in this paper. You don't have to argue that the person came of age. All you have to argue is that they've changed. And in any story worth reading, the main character will undergo some sort of change. Then you have your quote, your paraphrase, and your interpretation. So notice under here, under interpretation, it says how the figurative language in the example you've chosen shows that the narrator has indeed changed or come of age. So that means with your quote, you have to choose a quote that has an example of figurative language in it. So in other words, it shouldn't be something that's just literal, where the author is literally telling you something that the narrator is going through. This should be one of the examples of figurative language that you found in the text or that we've talked about. And then your interpretation is going to tell us what that example shows us about how the character has changed. And then this is the same thing except for the next story that you're working with. When we get to the conclusion, here is where it breaks it down for you. Which story were you more drawn to and why? And then what lessons or deeper meanings do you find in the story? How do they relate to your life or life in general? So as you are working on that, please feel free to reach out to me.